Hello and welcome, everyone. We're really glad to have you here today for our weekly OCI deep dive. For those of you who may be new to these events, we're hosted on Cloud Customer Connect, which is our Oracle community forum for end users. You'll see links in the chat, and I'll be sharing some resources throughout today that lead you back to those CCC forums. And if you're not already a member, we invite you to create a free account, join in discussion, all kinds of topics. My name is Kenna Kettrick. I'm a program manager here with the OCI go-to-market team. And today I'm joined by John Bresnovich, an architect here at Oracle, and Stephen Lemmy, senior principal product manager, to take us through capacity planning and some demos and all kinds of fun stuff. All right, I think that is quite enough from me. So John, you can go ahead and share, and Stephen, go ahead and take it away. It's all yours.
Thank you, Kenna. Good day, everyone. I'm Steve Lemmy, Senior Principal Product Manager here on the Observability and Management team, and thank you for joining us today. During the call, please ask questions during the session and participate in the polls, as it helps our speaker cover what is most applicable to you. And as Kenna was pointing out, it helps us schedule future sessions that are relevant to what you need for your job role. Kenna, if you could please go ahead and push out our audience background poll. And for our attendees, be sure to scroll down and respond to all the questions. And if you happen to be an Oracle employee, we ask you don't respond to the polls during today's session. Now, while we leave the poll up, let me go ahead and welcome you to the third session in our new series, Capacity Planning and Operations Insight Automation. And in this session, our expert speaker is going to share with you how you can bring together historical cloud and Oracle Enterprise Manager data to gain new insights using operations insights and machine learning technology. Use it for capacity planning, forecasting, avoiding impending database or Exadata issues, to identify seasonality, systemic or reoccurring SQL issues such as degraded performance or execution plan changes, and address them using SQL Warehouse capabilities. And demonstration examples showing you how you can use this latest technology and methods to solve problems. And John's going to probably share a lot of what he's learned in the industry that wasn't so successful, as well as best practices. So please go ahead and join me in welcoming our speaker today, Oracle architect John Bresnovich. Go ahead and close the polls. And let's see what we've got joining us today. Looks like we've got a lot of folks, JB, that are doing development, which is great. We have people who are using Enterprise Manager, and it says not many of them are familiar with actually Oracle Observability and Management solutions. And no surprise, John, some folks are actually writing scripts trying to do this, and they're struggling with it. So again, thank you everyone for sharing that extra information so John can craft his presentation and demo. So at this point, JB, why don't we go ahead and get you underway?
Thanks, Steve. That was quite a, I don't know, I don't think I quite match up to your promo there, but anyway, let's talk about Operations Insights. I think that this is a new OCI service, what we call cloud native OCI Gen 2 service that was launched last year, and it's basically the origin is really replatforming and to some extent reimagining some of the OMC Gen 1 functionality. I don't know if anyone on the call is a current OMC Gen 1 customer, but with significant changes in the OCI cloud infrastructure with Gen 2, we really wanted to introduce much more sort of cloud native versions of the OMC Gen 1 functionality. And so Operations Insights is sort of the first foray into that. Came out LA last year during the pandemic, and it's probably little known by customers. So I'm going to talk briefly, very briefly at a high level about Operations Insights. And then what I want to do is a deep dive demo into the capacity planning feature of the service. Safe harbor statement. I'm pretty sure everyone's seen this before. So we're just going to have a quick agenda, brief discussion, customer challenges, very high level overview of the services underneath Operations Insights. Brief mention of this thing, data lakehouse architecture, which is something that's sort of a unifying principle for a lot of what we're doing in Operations Insights. I just want to mention that, and then we'll basically go to the demo. Customer challenges. So these are sort of some of the use cases and customer kind of problem areas that Operations Insights is intending to address. So the Uber issue is really, getting deeper observability into your entire compute infrastructure, and especially database assets. We do tend to have a bias towards database, if you want to say that. But one of the key use cases is just cost optimization. Optimizing your CapEx spend for basic compute resources. That gets to basically making sure you've got enough resources without overspending, right? Without having to, without allocating or acquiring too much. Improving efficiency is another aspect of cost optimization. One database has got much more CPU than it needs. Another database is regularly hitting the limit. Maybe we can do something about that, right? So, reallocation of resources is also part of what this functionality is about.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
You've got, and the introduction was true. You've got years of experience in this area, and these challenges here are at a high level, and more, some of these people can say are kind of marketing bullets, but we had people who told us when they joined, they're trying to do this, writing their own scripts, or maybe they're using some free utility or tools.
Right.
So maybe you can expound on these challenges a little bit on what you've learned, or maybe some of the dead ends you've encountered, using some of those methods, because that'll help some folks.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things that we want to do is sort of do a lot of the heavy lifting and basically empower you to do kind of the thinking, right? And so the situation you're describing and kind of cobbling things together on your own, or sort of connecting different tools to each other, I mean, that's just an infinity of detail. Getting the data right, and how do I make sure that the data from this platform is sort of comparable to the similar data, but not quite from the same place on this other platform. And so a lot of what we do is sort of the heavy lifting of data curation, schlepping it into the cloud, putting it in a structured format, and then, adding value on top of that with sort of analytic services. And so, some of the screens that you see, you might say, well, that's not really that a big of a deal. Well, there's a big deal behind putting a simple screen together of actually accurate, well curated, and complete data across your enterprise. And so that's what our goal really is. And that gets at sort of managing on-premises management was sort of complicated because you had to connect all the wires yourself, right? But in the hybrid cloud, things are, you don't have to connect wires, but it's just a miasma of APIs and other things, right? And so, the hybrid cloud is, it's hard to get a handle on everything if you're sort of in the hybrid cloud situation, right? You've sort of probably got a handle on this piece of it and another handle on that piece of it. And so that's another aspect of what we want to be able to address, is sort of pulling everything into one place, if that's what you want to do.
Well, I think you touched upon it. That common data collection, whether you're on premise, you're in the cloud, or a hybrid combination, you've got to have, a common data model and format. And, if you're trying to do that with, a different tool or, scripts, some person may say, well, the database is busy if it's at 80%. Someone else says the database is busy at 90%. And everyone kind of has their own interpretation. And then you have all these different kind of data things, what is really, the truth. And right. In this, you've got some common model and, stuff you're doing machine learning behind the scenes that's going to help in the demonstration, show people how this all comes together.
Yeah, and we cover a lot of ground, right? And so we are able to offer, one of the key aspects, I think, of adopting Oracle technology is the fact that, it's all developed in the same place, by different teams, of course, but we can leverage that. We can offer much deeper connectivity between tools, right? So you might be using a DevOps oriented, you might be in a DevOps situation looking at a burgeoning performance problem, and then maybe want to quickly investigate the history of similar problems, or maybe that particular SQL back into time. Well, that's not a DevOps use case. It's more of an Operations Insights use case. But we can transition you from database management into Operations Insights, with the context of what the particular SQL idea was on the particular database that seems to be having an issue, right? So that's a key, I think that's a key aspect also, not just sort of doing the heavy lifting that I described, but also being able to connect tools to each other and provide a more comprehensive solution set and workflows through those tools. So, anyway, we've got a number. I want to get through the slides because I think
the demonstration should be great. So go ahead.
Yeah, so let's motor on. So we've got sort of four principal sort of service areas here in database management, which is really just sort of cloud native implementations of our best of breed database observability and performance management tools. So, we're very well known for, things like the Performance Hub and SQL monitoring and all the enterprise manager screens that have to do with database and performance, and all the diagnostic and tuning pack tools that are offered through EM. And we're sort of cherry picking the best of those, piece by piece, and pulling them into a cloud native OCI database management service. Operations Insights, I described its its beginnings as kind of a replatforming of a couple of key services from the OMC Gen 1, but it's now kind of grown a little bit and is incorporating other sort of data and analytics oriented services like AWR Hub and EM Warehouse, and we'll talk briefly about those. Logging Analytics is also replatformed from OMC Gen 1 onto the OCI Cloud. And that supports sort of AI apps with deep analytics over infrastructure and application logging data. So it's not just logging data, but it's actually, a lot of kind of ML and very flexible ability to basically interact with log data, but not just sort of doing greps and regular expressions, right? There's a lot of sophistication in logging analytics. And then APM, application performance monitoring, is very deep runtime observability into complex application stacks using, let's say, microservice architectures where there's lots of things going on. Maybe many very deep kind of call stacks in the application. Well, APM gives you very low level insight into applications, mostly as sort of a DevOps kind of orientation. Okay, so OPSI, we call it OPSI sort of casually in-house, but Operations Insights overview. So these are sort of the data. I sort of separate data and services. We don't really separate those, like say at the SKU level or anything, but Operations Insights is a lot about data, and it's a lot about added value services on top of that data. So capacity planning, I kind of described this. It's reimagined and replatformed from IT analytics in OMC Gen 1. SQL Warehouse, similarly. Something we've been working on, so that's why it sort of has a parenthetical second half 22 date there. This is SQL Explorer, which is, it combines collecting more detailed SQL workload statistics than SQL Warehouse currently has, and then combined with sort of interactive exploratory analytics. And we're probably going to have other explorers down the road, right? So this idea of, analytic exploration is sort of a theme in a way. AWR Hub, and then a corresponding explorer. Those are basically, there's an existing AWR Hub implementation, but it really wasn't sort of built using the same sort of data transfer and ingest architecture that we're evolving towards with OCI. So this, AWR Hub has been sort of integrated and replatformed into the OCI data lake house kind of architecture. Yeah.
Hey, John, just real quickly, we have some folks probably that haven't used Enterprise Manager. And what is AWR?
Well, AWR is well, if they haven't used Enterprise Manager, they still might know about AWR. AWR is the automated workload repository, which is a very comprehensive in-database store of just reams of internal database observability data. And it came out in Oracle 10 around 2004. And it's really the go-to place for expert Oracle DBAs to do performance troubleshooting and diagnostics. And it's built into the database. And for that reason, there's some limitations in the sense of you don't want to keep an infinite amount of history of performance snapshots in your production database, right? And so what AWR Hub does is it allows you to liberate those performance snapshots from the constraints of living in the production database, put them into the cloud, keep years worth of those, combine them with performance snapshots of other databases, and do advanced analytics on those things. So that's kind of what AWR Hub is. But AWR Hub is an inbuilt repository of Oracle performance observability telemetry. It's sort of a historical record of very detailed performance information that's been living inside Oracle databases since version 10, circa 2004 or so. And it's very well known among expert Oracle DBAs, of which hopefully there's some future on the call, as well as present. An EM warehouse, similarly, the EM is Enterprise Manager. Enterprise Manager is used by many customers to do monitoring, DevOps, lifecycle management, performance diagnostics on their enterprises. So it doesn't stop at the database, it includes hosts and all kinds of other compute infrastructure. And it's been around a while, and there's a lot of hugely valuable data in Enterprise Manager repositories. Enterprise Manager has agents that suck telemetry from all kinds of sources into a central repository. Well, Operations Insights is able to extract key performance and observability data out of those repositories, upload those into the cloud, persist them over the long term, combine them with data from other similar repositories, do advanced analytics.
Well, that covers one of the other challenges I had when I was a DBA. I only could keep about 30 days of the data because I didn't have the extra hardware and the storage, and management would always say, no, we're not spending any more money. That's all you get.
Yeah, I mean, the early, the AWR, the Diagon tuning pack were all sort of a big set of features for managing performance, and they were all built into the database. And, the advantage of that was they were all built into the database. And the disadvantage of that was they were all built into the database. Why is that a disadvantage? Well, any space they use up takes space away from real data, right? Any CPU cycles you use processing that data happen on the production machine, right? You're stealing CPU from real work, right? So there's a lot of advantages to just moving that data off into a separate, location, and there's a lot of advantages to doing those things in the cloud too, right? Anyway, let's keep going. Capacity planning. I have a feeling I'm way behind schedule.
No, you're doing fine, John.
Okay, let me know when there's 30 minutes left.
Okay.
Okay. So capacity planning is really about trending and forecasting basic compute resource demands, CPU, storage, memory, either at database or host level, or Exadata. We have sort of a separate service for Exadata, but it does a lot of the same things that you'll see. Basically, let's quantifying over and underutilization. That's useful in, say, consolidation exercises. We want to predict utilization issues, right? Let's buy more gas before we run out of gas, right? You don't have to buy you don't have to buy gas when you got 3/4 of a tank left, right? But it's nice to know that, hey, at the rate you're going, you're going to run out of gas next week, right? So maybe over the weekend you buy more gas, right? So mitigating problems before they happen. And then forecasting aggregate future demand. Okay, so databases have to be sort of forecasted individually because their workloads are sort of specific to their database, right? But when you're doing CapEx planning, you want to aggregate over your real estate, over your entire estate, or you might want to sort of separate subdivide your IT estate in some way and aggregate and forecast aggregate demand, right? How much are all my databases going to want, right? SQL Warehouse is all really about capturing and tracking, important SQL in your application workloads. And one of the main use cases is just, looking for the boiling frog in your SQL, right? The slowly degrading SQL that's kind of mission critical and, seems to be degrading gradually. Well, at some point, the frog's going to boil, right? Correlating performance with plan changes, so that's another aspect of SQL Warehouse does. It collects execution plans, previous and current, and if there's been plan changes, there's some facility for actually comparing sort of better to worse, and identifying scalability and inefficiency issues, right? So looking at your SQL workload and finding out determining where there may be non-scalable kind of work taking place, or if there's gross inefficiency, contention, let's say. AWR Hub, EM Warehouse. I think I talked a little bit about these, but these are sort of existing repositories of telemetry that are either out in Enterprise Manager repositories or in AWR, in each database as AWR Hub. And so Operations Insights is now going to be sucking those things into the cloud, into a common sort of cloud platform. And one of the key things here is well, we'll talk about this when I just sort of mentioned this data lakehouse kind of concept. Exadata Insights, a lot of traction in customer world for Exadata specific kind of tools. Exadata, amazing technology, great uptake from customers, and we're committed to developing very effective tools for managing Exadata. And again, the orientation of OCI Operations Insights is longer term and fleet wide, right? not just this Exadata, but all your Exadatas, right? All right, I'm just going to mention this data lakehouse thing because it's it's kind of a concept that's been creeping up on us sort of gradually, and now we're kind of, we're kind of wrapping our arms around it and giving it a bear hug in terms of OPSI, right? So I don't know if you've sort of seen this term. I was introduced to it less than a year ago. It sort of seems to pop up recently in the sort of data warehousing landscape. But basically, this sort of operations observability and management, that's kind of what O&M, it's such a mouthful, I just put O&M. This data lakehouse is really kind of an emerging architectural paradigm for us for migrating observability data and services into the OCI, into the cloud, into the Oracle cloud. So we have a lot of existing, when I say we, I mean our group is kind of responsible for EM and also responsible for diagon tuning packs. So that's what, the Enterprise Manager Repository and the AWR and active session history, these important sources of observability telemetry are already kind of in our domain, our group's domain. And so we want to basically leverage those, and also leverage those both to customer advantage and also, frankly, to our advantage, right? It helps us if you start putting your low risk observability data into the cloud and combining it, across your hybrid real estate and getting value out of it. It helps us because, you're using our cloud, right? But we think it's going to be very valuable, of course, for customers. That's what we call a value proposition, win-win.
Well, John, there was a question that had come in while you had been presenting,
Yeah.
And we had spoken about, sourcing, data from Enterprise Manager. But on that second bullet you've got, it's not just Enterprise Manager here. If customers don't have it, that's fine, because it's ingesting data from other sources, from, I guess, practically anywhere. Because at the beginning we were talking about it could be.
There's an agent that we call the Max agent that you can deploy, and it'll collect and it'll collect data. So if you can. You can integrate non-EM off-cloud databases into Operations Insights, but it requires an agent. I mean, there's always somebody that's got to collect data and send it, right? But it doesn't require a full-on Enterprise Manager deployment. There's what they call the MAX. I forget what MACS stands for. I think it's something agent service. I think A is agent and S is service, right? I'm not sure what the end. Maybe somebody can help on the chat.
Well, you said to also remind you about the time we got to bottom of the hour
okay, so
for your demonstration. So it's about that time if you're ready.
Yeah, so our sort of data lakehouse thing is basically, siphoning off data from telemetry sources, observability data from various telemetry sources, pulling them into the cloud through an Oracle object store, which we call a data lake, right? And then ETLing out of the data lake into service-specific, typically ADWs, data warehouses, because we're doing sort of analytic type, SQL-based analytic type action on that data. And then I sort of mentioned that I would mention this, so I'll mention it. Another aspect is that, a lot of customers are very sophisticated about some of this data already. AWR data is used by lots of expert DBAs in various ways. And so one thing we think is going to be very useful for customers is having direct sort of access to the unstructured data in the data lake for purposes of advanced data science of their own, or very specific applications that really maybe only make sense for a specific customer or two. And really, in other words, the data can be leveraged not just by our services, but by customers themselves. All right. These aren't reference customers. I think these are just users. Some are reference customers. I'm not sure which are which. Okay, let's go to the demo. This is sort of our homepage, but I want to show you how people may not have really got much familiarity. And in all honesty, I don't spend a lot of time on the OCI cloud myself. So I just thought I'd see, just show you how we got here, right? So this is, I'm logged into the OCI. On this left side menu, you can see, compute, storage, networking, all the way down, and observability and management. That's where we live. And you can see we have a lot of offerings here in the context of observability and management. APM, logging analytics, so basic logging, and then sort of AI on top of logging, monitoring, events. And here we are, Operations Insights. So click that. This is our sort of our landing page for the services. On the left here is sort of the menu, and importantly, the scope filter. Scope defines basically what you're going to look at, what you're going to analyze in a given session of Operations Insights. So when you change the scope, you're kind of changing the entire scope of the analysis in terms of which entities are you actually looking at. So we can actually see that here. It says include child compartments. So the key thing for scope, sort of universally in OCI and certainly within Operations Insights, is whether the compartment. So compartments are hierarchical. Customers will organize those however they'll organize them. We don't impose any particular discipline on how compartments should be organized. But selecting your compartment, if you get on here and you say, hey, where's all my databases, you probably are not in the right compartment. It happens to me all the time. And we can see compartments are a hierarchy, and we can actually include child compartments. So now we're actually seeing that if we include child compartments, which Operations Insights has this Exadata child compartment, we've added a bunch of databases because there's databases in that child compartment. But we're just going to focus on this compartment. Just a little tile here for each of the services, what's new, kind of links to late breaking or new feature documentation. So let's just look at capacity planning here. I'm going to focus on CPU. It's your core resource, and if you kind of see what we can do with CPU, you kind of see what we do with storage and memory also, because we have pretty much the same interaction paradigm. There's some slight differences, but they're very minor. So I'll just talk about CPU. So here's the sort of the summary page for all of capacity planning. So it has sort of thumbnail for all the resources: CPU, storage, memory. At the very top here, an inventory tile. We can break it down by type of database, which is the sort of default, by version, how many of, so we have 29 version 12.102 databases in this fleet. Again, the fleet is the databases in the Operations Insights compartment. Telemetry refers to how the data got in here. Is it native OCI infrastructure, or is it coming from an agent service? These are very high-level tiles, high-level summaries of total storage across the scope, right? So not total storage, but total resource across the scope: CPU, storage, memory, I/O. What does it mean? Well, this is how much is used. This is the capacity, right? So this is about 37%. Capacity utilization is about 37%. The other thing to note here is there's a brief trend up here. So what is this minus 2.71? What is this plus 27%, right? Well, what it refers to is the change in CPU utilization over the selected time period. Now, I want to talk about the time range is the last 30 days. So this is basically saying total CPU utilization in aggregate has shrunk by 2.7% over the last 30 days, but storage demand or storage utilization has increased by 27%, or storage usage has increased, utilization has increased by that. So this time range filter is a filter. Again, it defines the scope of the analysis. So lots of the things we do here are over a time range, right? And this is the time range. So if we're looking at a trend or a forecast, we basically when we select the time range, we're selecting the length of the training period for the trending, right? Let's look at CPU here at the top. We have a tile called CPU Insights. I'll talk about that in a minute. Top consumers, and then total trend, right? So top consumers is just top 5 by usage or by usage change, right? Who's growing the most? So who's using the most is the first one. Who's growing the most? That's the second one. And who is, you know, the most utilized, or the closest, currently the closest to, you know, being out of gas, right? So those are the 3 ways you can break the top list down. This is aggregate allocation of CPU and aggregate average usage of CPU. So at an enterprise level, right, we're kind of, you know, maybe we're oversubscribed. We certainly have a lot of headroom, right? There's a lot of distance between the green line and the red line, right? Okay, let's talk about insights. What we do here is we try to give you a heads up if any databases are going to be over or underutilized, either currently or in the near term, let's say within 30 days. And how do we do that? Well, we basically, you know, use the time range and dynamically just compute trends, rates of increase, and then push those out 30 days and see whether which databases are predicted to be above the high threshold, which is we fix it at 75%, or below the low threshold of 25%. Now, if we click on these are hot links. They take us to the more detailed view, right? So let's click on the high utilization. Now we get to a screen which is a kind of a master detail screen, and we'll focus here on the list. This is a list of databases filtered by the insight that we clicked on, right? So these are the list of high utilization databases. We could make low utilization databases. We could search for a specific database, but it's really, you know, looking at a list of the databases. The intention here is to really find an individual that is interesting out of, let's say, the fleet. So if you're looking at low utilization databases, you can see, well, how low are they? That's this column. You know, have they been changing? So did they get low? Are they growing? If they're low now, but they're growing, well, maybe I don't want to, you know, deallocate any CPU because they're growing, right? But if they're low now and they're shrinking, well, you know, maybe they're just going down to 0, right? So that's, maybe we can just liberate some CPU there.
Well, you know, John, for just this use case, when I was a DPA, every week I had to supply to my management a kind of a report saying, you know, what was the most utilized database or underutilized database. And just this one use case would save me hours each week.
Yeah. Well, you're going to have some real cool stuff in a second here. But this is, let's just go down. So this is master detail. And the detail here is our sort of trending and forecasting window, right? So it basically shows you by default the time range, which is the training window for the forecast. So if you pick the last 30 days, you can see here are the last 30 days. And this is the forecast. This green line is the average usage, right? Now you can also click on a red line called the max usage. Now this is pretty curious. Max usage, and you know, usually your max and your average aren't that close together. Now that there's a little secret here, which is that this data is not actually coming from a real database. What we've done is we pre-populated the back-end workload, you know, the back-end ADW database with some synthetic data. The APIs are all actually accessing that synthetic data, doing the computations, but we've made it look kind of interesting so that you can do things like use machine learning and detect seasonality in your data. So the machine learning can be used to detect seasonality of the kind hour of the day seasonality or day of the week seasonality. It currently doesn't detect longer seasonalities than day of the week. And that's something we'd be interested in feedback about, you know, longer cycle seasonality. And these things are, you know, the graphics here, you know, you can sort of pick and choose to see what you want to see, right? So here we got sort of you kind of you can manipulate what you want to see. Here we're changing, looking at different confidence channels. So that's the trending and forecasting, machine learning and linear. Often linear is just going to be good enough, especially for, thumbnail kind of thing, back of the envelope kind of calculations. But let's get to the real eye candy and cool stuff here. So this is aggregation. So, identifying individual low utilization, individual high utilization, projected low utilization, projected high utilization at an individual database level, those are all important, right? But a lot of capacity planning is about the aggregate, right? The whole estate, not just this database or that database. And that's what this interface here lets you do. This is a very, so now we've changed to the aggregate tab, and in the aggregate tab, we see all the databases. We don't just see the top 10 with one line per, and then, with a scroll button to get to the others or something. Everybody's in here, right? And this is a tree map. Hopefully, tree maps can be a challenge sometimes. What I tell people is just keep at it. You'll get it, right? They're not that complicated. They're kind of like fancy pie charts in a way. They're sort of like multi-dimensional pie charts. That's probably the best way to think of it. But basically, every cell in the tree map is sized according to one of our key measures. In this case, by default, we size by how much CPU is being used by each database. So the bigger the rectangle, the more CPU the database is using, right? So these are, this tree map is organized by, who's burning the most CPU, right? We can also organize it where the size of the cell is by who's been allocated the most CPU, right? So that's a different view, right? CRM EP is clearly much larger. It looks like he's 4 or maybe 6 times larger than the next highest, the highest one. Here's 128 CPUs. Here's 832. It's probably fake data. I don't think we have an 800 CPU.
I think it was one of those junior DBAs reserving more CPU than they needed.
Yeah, right. So that's sort of the basic tree map. Now, what's the color of the tree map? Well, the tree map color by default shows you how utilized the database is. Now, we use green as a kind of a branded color for CPU and blue as a kind of branded color for IO or storage, because those kind of go harken back to the color branding in the main performance page of Enterprise Manager and what's now Performance Hub. Top activity page is something DBAs might have familiarity with. Anyway, so you can tell by the color, the darker the color, the higher the utilization. So you can sort of see by the color and the size, how much is it utilized and how big is it, how much is it allocated. The biggest guy is very underutilized. Some of these smaller ones are actually, highly utilized, right? And so that's the power of one of the powers of the tree map. Now, the other cool thing about the tree map is it's master detail with the bottom. So if I think this guy is interesting, I just go look at this guy. If I think this guy is interesting, I just go look at this guy, right? Now, with respect to capacity planning, the tree
Hey,
map,
John?
Yeah,
just,
sure.
Just to give you a time check, I know there's a lot here on just the tree map, but you've got about 10 minutes left if there's some other stuff you wanted to demonstrate as well today.
Let me just show a quick couple of things here, and then I'll flash a couple of screens without talking about them. But for capacity planning, one of the things you want to do is kind of see, how much low utilization real estate do I have? So I've broken the tree map down by utilization level, and that groups all the low utilization databases together in a big cell, and then they occupy subcells within that. Medium high utilization, again, is a big cell, and then these are all the medium high, right? And you can see, they break out by color, right? Because the color is by utilization. So the dark green, this is low, this is the next low. The size, the tree map is organized by size. So the biggest subgroup is low utilization. The second biggest subgroup is medium. And again, you can trend the aggregate, right? So now I'm trending the sum of all these guys, okay? So that's sort of a key thing. Where is this group of databases going? And we have different ways to group by type, if you wanted to sort of split them out by database type, databases that share the same host. That one didn't quite work out too well. The main one here is utilization. Okay, so I'll just quickly show this without getting at it too detailed, but we can actually show, you know, who's using what, that's sizing by usage, and are they growing or shrinking, right? So shrinking are the databases that are colored in this shades of this amber. And the growing ones are the ones, again, that are growing, are shades of green, sort of the CPU green. So that's a very cool thing. You can see that, you know, we have medium low utilization databases, but 2 of them are growing, 1 of them very quickly, right? So, and many of them are shrinking. So the ones that are shrinking are probably good candidates for liberating CPU from. The ones that are growing, well, you know, they're low utilization, but they're growing, so leave them alone, right? So these are the kinds of thought processes that this functionality supports. Okay.
You're also answering the questions that, you know, commonly people get in IT operations, which is as soon as you show them something, they ask more questions, and so this is helping to answer those questions.
Yeah, no, I think this is very powerful in terms of sort of getting, you know, combining a big picture with, you know, the ability to aggregate forecasts, as well as pick out individuals that differ from, let's say, the crowd. So it's very powerful. Okay, so that I'm going to just kind of call it a day there. I mean, there's so much more we could show. There's a lot of things about sort of, I like to switch between time ranges myself, you know, sort of flip-flop between the 30-day perspective and the 90-day perspective, sort of, because that changes forecasts, right? If you put 30 days of data and forecast out, you might end up with a different prediction than if you use 90 days of data, right? So maybe the recent trend is very different from the longer term trend, right? So let's just quickly, everybody loves Exadata. So actually, see, here's a case of wrong compartment. This is demo stuff, right? So we have a special demo compartment for Exadata. And this is just sort of the opening screen. And if you drill down, you get to some very similar screens that, well, this is sort of a detail on the rack and various components, days to high. So this is sort of, again, this is sort of the prediction about when it might, you know, get high utilization. It turns red if it's either high now or it's predicted to get high. And these are very similar to the capacity planning, just sort of isolated to this Exadata machine, but similar workflows to the ones we just showed. Let's go back to Operations Insights Home and SQL Warehouse. SQL Warehouse is pretty much, it's had some enhancements since the OMC. Oh, see, I'm in the wrong compartment. It's had some enhancements since the OMC Gen 1, but they've been sort of cosmetic. And we're doing a lot of work on sort of the next version of this, but I can't really talk about it because it's, you know, that slide we showed at the beginning. But this is SQL Warehouse, AWR Hub. Not much to see here. It's really just about sort of identifying databases and snapshots for onboarding. This is, you know, very sort of nascent in terms of presence in Operations Insights. An administration menu, I won't go through all this, but you know, this used to be a one-pager. Now you can see it's quite, there's a lot of complexity here. EM bridges are actually a little thing you define that helps you onboard into the data lakehouse from EM, right? So that's a special thing to sort of administer. But this is really how you would onboard databases or hosts or Exadatas into Operations Insights, even from, let's say, you know, your on-premises operations. So when you're onboarding, it depends on kind of where the data is coming from. That's what this is. That's what this telemetry section is. And if you pick Enterprise Manager, you've got a different set of questions to answer than if it's a native cloud database or if it's managed by the OCI Max Management Agent Service. All right, I'm going to just stop there. That was a pretty, I mean, we didn't get as deep as I wanted to. But I think, this is a good time if anybody wants to ask questions. Should I stop sharing? I suppose I should.
Well, John, you're covering a subject matter that each area you kind of touched upon could probably be a webcast in itself. And again, I'm just reflecting back again from my DBA days. I would collect things like some scripts and put them into a spreadsheet, and I would spend a third of my time, providing reports. And it didn't matter whether it was, trying to understand the capacity of where the development environments were going or what are production environments. But each time I showed something, then I would get questions from management, and I had to go back and do more of the stuff manually. And I can see many different ways. This could be used by DevOps. It could be used by, IT ops. And you just use the words, machine learning, but, these aren't just simple averages. There's a lot of special things going on behind the scenes that, again, we don't have time to cover in detail. And if somebody wanted to do that, I'm sure you would sit and explain it. Couple of the questions that have come in, one of them just in general is, does it support this? Does it support that? And the good news is this is a cloud service. So literally every time you're logging into the service, there's new functionality, there's new support that's appearing. So there's like a weekly cadence going on.
I'm glad you mentioned that. There's only one version of the software and you're not the person that has to update it. Right. And when the bugs get fixed, they get fixed everywhere right away. Right. I mean, there's a lot of advantages to cloud services. Right.
Yeah. And again, in the early days of, some of the third party products, they would have a model that they would kind of set up. And then, if technology changed, if, methods changed, their model didn't change. And so over time, their model became invalid. And I remember some of those products. But there's also some questions coming in about, does this work with Oracle, database multi-tenant? And I saw some CDB stuff. So I think the answer is, yes.
Yeah, the answer is, well, maybe Murtaza can answer more detail, but yes. When you say multi-tenant, you mean, when they mean multi-tenant, they mean you own the CDB and want to register?
Well, even more simply, is a lot of customers now are moving to, say, Oracle Database 19C or even 21.
Right. And
they may have come from the world of 11 where, they weren't using multi-tenant. So now the activity of doing capacity and planning has, a little bit more complexity because I'm dealing with, PDBs or CDBs, and, it's kind of a new world to some folks. And it looks like this is going to help them.
The CDB split is a little bit difficult, or not difficult, but it's sort of introduced additional kind of aspects to things. I think right now, like say if you had a PDB in an on-prem CDB that was managed by an EM agent, and you wanted to just register that PDB for Operations Insights, right? Not the CDB, but just that one alone. I think that's not something that you can do quite yet. But that's certainly on the roadmap because, PDBs are, PDBs are databases. CDBs aren't databases. That's my personal opinion, right? CDBs are built from Oracle databases, but they're not really themselves intended to be Oracle databases. They're containers of Oracle databases, right? So really the database of the future is the PDB, right?
Yep.
And the CDB is, an Uber management structure, and it's built out of Oracle databases. It happens to be an Oracle database, but it's not really, in my opinion, proper to think about it as an Oracle database, like as a place you would dump your own data, right? The CDB is really a platform for managing many databases using a common resource manager, common access to CPUs, common, shared pool, lots of sharing there, because there's a lot of sophisticated stuff inside an Oracle database that, PDBs can usefully share, but they're really each a database into themselves, and they should be thought of as the database real estate. The PDB is really kind of a container of, right?
Yeah, we could probably do a whole session on that, John.
Yeah,
and again, it's in our interest, in our roadmap. It's our own database. If things don't have a support today, then certainly it's on our roadmap. Many more questions have been pouring in, and we're starting to run out of time here. So
hey,
another one is
mention one thing, because it's like my most powerful concept that I didn't get to, right? So why do we show the average and the max, right? Why do we trend the average and the max, right? Well, from a capacity planning point of view, especially let's say CPU, right? You kind of have to provision against the max, because you don't want to run out of gas when you're doing the most business, right? So you sort of have to provision against the max. But the average represents really what you've used, right? And so the difference between the max and the average, first of all, it's expressible in a number that has a dollar sign next to it, which is OCPUs, right? And it kind of represents what I call the opportunity cost of workload volatility, right? If you didn't have volatile workloads, if your workloads didn't go up and down and use more CPUs sometimes and less sometimes, right? Well, then the max and the average would be the same line, right? They would be a straight line. There would be no delta between the max and the average. And it would be very clear how much to provision, right? That line would be how much you need, right? But when your max and your average are different, what that means is you're having to provision a lot more than you're really using on average, right? And why is that? Well, because occasionally you need a lot, and it's traditionally very difficult to sort of pull extra CPU and swap it out, right? So these are actually, that's sort of one thing. This is the opportunity cost of workload volatility, but it represents sort of a cloud opportunity for things like auto scaling, right? Where you can actually provision to your average, but auto scale to your max, right? So that's kind of, I wanted to get that in. I'm sorry I went over that.
Well, no, we've got permission to actually go over a few minutes because we've got so many good questions coming at this point. So let me see if I can get some simple ones by you. We've got someone asking about.
I'm going to stop sharing now so I can look at things on chat.
We've got someone asking, well, what if I've got SE databases, Oracle Database SE? Can I, use Operations Insight and this functionality with those?
I don't think so. I don't know. Murtaza, do we have I don't think I've ever really,
so we can go off and check on that one. Okay.
Yeah, we need to double.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any.
We need to double click on
but
that.
We can check. Yeah.
Yep, that's a good question, and thank you for providing that. We'll go check on that one. What about working with SQL plan? Changes down to the SQL level. We didn't touch upon kind of the SQL aspect of things, so maybe you can say a few words about that.
What's that?
For instance, can I track SQL plan and performance changes down to individual SQLs? You were, starting to go.
Yeah, they are at individual SQL level. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Simple answer. Great.
Yes. Short answer is yes. It's not like every SQL or every plan, right? So that's the caveat, right? It's sort of, interesting SQL that have that.
We've used the term cloud native today, and what is meant by that, and I'm pretty sure, John, that means we've got essentially technology that's built natively on the cloud, and that's essentially this is on Oracle Cloud infrastructure, and it's a cloud native app, i.e., Operations Insight, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, sort of building, cloud native apps. To us means, using OCI APIs, kind of following the OCI way. There's a lot of areas where you have to define permissions over all your APIs. You have to sort of, it's a whole, it's a whole sort of development regime.
Well, the other thing is, Oracle Observability and Management, that thing you said earlier, hard to say, is a platform. And so these different services exchange and share information with each other in context, versus if you're working with some of the other, cloud services, they don't necessarily do that. It's kind of like more cloud silos. In this case, as you're working on OCI, as you were showing in the menu, John, you would go down to observability and management, and I could start working with these in context and with other services, to do even more things. So I think that's something folks may not be familiar with. There's some more information out there on o.com and some sessions about the O&M platform. It's good to get familiar with that as well, for folks who are asking about, kind of cloud native type of capabilities. I think at this point,
just a quick one.
Go ahead, Murtaza.
On that, right? Just a quick one on cloud native, right? In other words, essentially, we are basically utilizing complementary services on OCI to build OCI and other cloud native services, right? So it's basically in conjunction with other services to build something natively within cloud, right? Just wanted to add that, yeah.
Great. Well, we're a few minutes over here, and again, everyone, thank you for these wonderful questions, and it's great to have you on today, John. I think we're going to have to come back and do a specific session, John, related to multi-tenant database. It definitely sparked some interest on what you can do there in terms of capacity planning and forecasting. But I know here in a minute that Kenna's going to come in and give me the hook. So why don't we go ahead and push out that last poll, Kenna, that we've got, I think, 2 more polls before you go. And please take a moment and fill this out, and I'll work to go ahead and get us closed out here, John. So again, folks, thank you for joining. And before you go today, we've got a couple of polls. So please tell us if this session was informative and actionable. And JB, thank you, as well as our QA team members and to our audience for taking the time and attending today's session, Capacity Planning and Operations Insight Automation. And be sure to watch for future OCI community topics and sign up for other sessions scheduled in this series. And so that's going to wrap up our session for today. We'll hang on here just a little bit longer if there's any remaining questions, but that is it for today. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks so much, folks. Appreciate all of your time and the time the audience has spent with us as well. I know we're a little bit over, so appreciate you sticking around. And thanks so much to the presenters, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.